Okay,
Go ahead.
great. All right, so we got the Terman radio book. Terman was a professor of electrical engineering at Stanford, and he's, considered one of the experts. Then we have like two ARRL handbooks. So actually, I have three on the shelf here. I have a 1977, a 2014, and a 2022. But you all get QST magazine, maybe, and the October issue, which just came, has a good article on how solar flares and affect the solar cycle affects propagation. All right, page down. Let's see. How do we get the page down now that you? Oh, okay. So there are many. The thing is, we all live in cycles. There are many cycles related to the interaction of the sun and the earth. The sun rotates, so those sunspots that you see, they're spinning around on a 27-day cycle. The earth, it's spinning around on a 24-hour cycle. So we're not getting constant radiation from the sun. The earth the tilt of the earth relative to the sun also results in variances in how much solar radiation reaches the earth. It takes 8 minutes for a solar flare to send its light and gamma rays and X-rays towards the Earth, but it takes longer, like up to 4 days, for the solar particles to reach the Earth. And there just was on Tuesday a major eruption which will reach the Earth today and tomorrow. All right, there's several types of radio wave propagation. The very low frequencies depended on ground waves, which depend on the conductivity of the surface of the Earth. That's why early shortwave transmitters were located by the shore. A station back from the shore already has more losses associated with it. Then there's ground waves work mostly on the 160 and 80 meter bands, primarily AM broadcast bands. And ground waves are what's carrying your signal during the day when the D layer absorbs these signals and makes long range difficult. At night, the D layer disappears. Now we'll go into the layers. All right, I found this chart. I mean, radio propagation is nothing new. I mean, was invented in like 1890, and the theory. So by the time you're in 1932, I mean, there've already been all the major inventions of radio are happening. You had superheterodyne, you had frequency modulation, television had already been invented like in 1920s. So what's new? Everything is new, but not. So this chart was showing you how the ground wave uh, propagates. First on the right hand side is seawater, and that carries. Uh, you can see the signals can stretch out to 1,000 miles or more on this log scale. Whereas if you have a foreground, the ground waves reach, depending on the frequency. So they're going here, like at a 1 megahertz, you might get a couple 100 miles, whereas near the seawater as a ground, you might be getting 1,000 miles. So those are the effects on ground waves. Now there's sky waves, which is what we're mostly all using. And by definition, ionosphere is the space above our planet where there's a sparse number of air molecules. Now, you have to understand the solar radiation hits these air molecules at at different heights, and depending on the concentration of molecules, they can stay ionized for hours at the very high altitudes where there's few molecules to recombine with, whereas if you're at the 20 miles at the lower altitudes, there's still more air molecules, so that ionized gases would tend to become unionized relatively quickly. That's why certain layers are active during the day and certain layers are active during the evening. So here's a chart of the different layers, and they were all named at different times. Different people started finding these layers. First they had the E layer, then came the F layer, and then there was lower E layers, and they call that the D layer, which A, B, C, D, E, F. Okay, so that makes some sense. But F is a huge region from, 60 to 250, 300 miles up. And so you have different layers of ionized gases. At night, during the day, the sun reaches down to the F1 layer, and you've got a layer of ionized molecules there. Now, the reason it matters is the ionized molecules refract the radio waves. That is, it's not reflection like in a mirror. It's more of like when you put a pencil in a glass of water and the pencil appears to bend. Well, it's the same with the radio waves hitting the various layers. They bend over, they don't bounce off. And depending on the frequency, they'll either bounce back to Earth, or depending on the conditions, they can go straight out into space. So, I mean, the higher frequency bands tend not. I mean, we're talking above the 6 meter band. You're now talking about satellite communication. So these layers are not absorbing your signal. The layers allow the signals to go, and reach the satellites at a couple hundred or 1,000 miles up. Whereas at lower frequencies, they hit the various layers, and if the conditions are right, they'll come back to Earth. If there's not enough ionization, again, it'll go up into space. So here, this is refraction, not reflection. This is there's your whole ionosphere, and within it, it has a slightly different refractive index than air. And just like light is refracted through water, the radio waves are refracted through the ionosphere. That's how you should be thinking about it. Now you have different densities of electrons due to ionization. So the E layer being your lowest layer, I mean, the sun has to reach it to cause any ionization for that to be effective. And in the evening, and the F layers, of course, get ionized during the day. At night, the F layer can hold those ions, will last a while. That's the whole thing about recombination. Recombination says the ionization of the gases may stay there for a few hours whereas the E layer, it usually is, will dissipate the ionization faster because there's a higher concentration of molecules. Again, some old pictures with still in 1933, they were making these measurements, which, we're still doing that type of work today. So, comparing, again, two references, the Terman's book on the left and the ARRL handbook. they get these layers still at about the same heights, 30, in all these years of improving measurements, the heights of these layers stay, have been measured fairly well. And of course, their effect changes with frequency. So then we have seasonal effects. In some, we have summer. Let's see. We have summer propagation, which gives you a higher and denser ionosphere because you have more sunlight. You have better high frequency propagation during the day on higher frequency bands, again, because you have the F2 layers will get more sunlight. In the winter, you have less sunlight, so you have a less dense ionospheric labor, but you get better nighttime propagation on low frequency bands. And spring and fall, they say, well, that's transitional. Tips for operators. Summer tip: use the higher frequency bands during the day. In the winter, focus on the lower frequency bands at night. And yeah, I mean, 30 meters. I'll talk about the bands specifically later. In the spring and fall, well, you're in flux. So good luck. Now, here's solar flux versus the sunspot number. And so this is for our current solar cycle, and the lower chart the lower graph shows all the sunspot cycles back to the 1700s, and you can see there you've got big ones and little ones, and right now ours is it's not the biggest one ever by any stretch, but but within the average you get certain really interesting peaks that occur, but they all get washed out into the average number. So it depends, on any given day, things will be in flux. Okay, so here was the 30-day for September, the 30-day solar activity, and if you're operating every day, you'll see some correlation of which days you get your more DX than other days. And I'd like to study my own records, but I mean nothing's exact because if it's a bad day, you're not going to work much, so you're not going to try as hard as if it's a great day. You may stay on all day making contacts. I mean, Jon told me he's been making great FT8 contacts on his rig, getting like 60 in a few hours, which is great. Now, we have other modes of propagation. We had a great talk from this colonel at West Point on near vertical incidents where you want to be able to cover a radius around your transmission point, like you're in the Army, and you want to contact your troops that are within couple of 100-mile radius. So you shoot your signal straight up in the ionosphere. It bounces straight down. I mean, not straight down, it diffuses and it comes down. So it'll cover, a region. Then you have line of sight, which is microwave towers, satellites, parabolic dishes, and narrow beam Yagis at high frequency. And that's a whole other talk in itself. But in line of sight communication, the way you can get over a mountain, what they say is knife edge diffraction. You aim for the top of the mountain, and some of the signal may spill over into a a somewhat erratic pattern, but there are ways to get over that mountain. So I then found in the ARRL handbook, they discussed each band individually. And so I tried to summarize what was in their chart, which was on propagation summary by band. And there was 2 pages of text. So looking through it, it indicated which layers of the ionosphere the different waves would be bouncing off. So if we start at 100, there was also the article that I just referenced in this month's QST, and I just added that to my chart as to what effect the solar cycle has on each band. But always the interesting points out of all this data, and I have it for both bands. And I don't think I want to read all this data, but it'll get posted on the website. But the important things that I got out of this is that the 17 and the 30-meter band, generally, there aren't as many hams on it because it's an odd frequency mix that a lot of Yagi big beam antennas aren't tuned for. They're tuned for 10 and 20 and 40, and the 30 and the 17 and the 12s don't fit into these even patterns. The other thing being, of course, like 10 meters, there's a limit on your power of 200 watts. On 30 meters, I mean, there's a power limit. And that would require a very large, no, few people would ever have a beam antenna for 30 meters. I mean, it's a monster. But not to say there aren't any, but you're not competing with the whole world. And a lot of people just can't tune up that band. So what I find is I get lots of contacts on 30 when 20 is crowded. And even though they indicate no activity, I go sneak over to 30. I have no problem tuning up my screwdriver antenna for any band. So I can work 30 all the time. Everybody works 20 meters all of the time. It's crowded all the time. It's affected. It's from the solar cycle, it's not so good at midday when the E layer is activated. Other interesting notes here. It's at the 15-meter band. It says during the solar cycle, it's good from dawn to late night, but it has less D-layer absorption. And at night, it's good everywhere. Let's see. So the summary, the ionized particles essentially get hit by your radio waves, and they re-radiate. I mean, they're ionized, and they're vibrating at the frequency of your radio wave and send it back. There's seasonal variations due to the angle of the sun, daily variations due to whether the lowest layers are ionized, the D layer, and in the evening, whether you're at the F layers. The E layer during the day, the F layers will still maintain their ionization. The sunspot cycles and the cosmic mass ejection totally disrupt the order of the ionosphere. They bring radio noise with them. They change the patterns of reflection, and that's why it messes up your hobby, messes up transmission. Doesn't necessarily mean it's over for everybody, but it can cause a lot of damage. So you have to enjoy your hobby, learn what nature does for you, and that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Johnny?
I think I had one question. What would you say is the best antenna? Oh, I'm blanking on the right word here. I'll just give an example, like NVIS, inverted V. What would you say is the best orientation to have your antenna in for a nighttime HF?
Oh, I don't have a choice. The best orientation is, where do you want to talk? I've got the vertical screwdriver antenna is essentially not very directional, but remember, it's stuck on my balcony with the building behind it and walls on either side of it. So I don't have a lot to say on how I orient my antenna. I also have an end-fed 22-foot end-fed antenna. Again, it's hanging north-south because that's how my balcony is, and I get everywhere. So yeah, it is better. It's where you want to talk. Do you want to talk? I had my antennas up in my home, and they were oriented north south, and I always could get Europe all the time. Problem with that location was I had a stone wall on the west end of my antenna, so the only free air space I had was blasting out forward towards Europe, and that was the antenna there was north. Yeah, antenna was north south, and here my antenna is north south. In fact, I'm basically on the same block except 2 blocks away. So yeah, so my antenna is facing it's open to the west in this apartment, but east is through my building, and I have no problem getting Europe again or South America. I got everything. I got Japan, I got Alaska, Norway, Australia. It's has to do with this is all on FT8 because the background noise in an apartment building is usually atrocious for voice. I don't know if you're working voice out of your apartment or not.
Mainly FT8.
Okay, that's why, because I can't talk to anybody. The only way I can talk to somebody is, yeah, I can transmit out of here, great. And I can tune into John's remote station and listen to the other side of a conversation. So, I can broadcast from his station, I can broadcast from my station. And then there's another website, K3FEP, Frank Edward Peter, and they are a remote receiving station, I think out in Pennsylvania or somewhere. So you could try to, if you can't hear the station due to your local noise, you can try receiving at a remote station. There's a lot of ways to play this hobby and have fun and make it interesting.
Gotcha.
Okay, I'm retired, so I got all day to fool around with this. Well, thank you again. Any other questions? All right. Well, yeah.
Wait a
All
minute.
right, John,
One
you
question.
can stop the recording.